So that's better.
Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today and this morning I have fabulous Marc Singer. Good morning to you, Marc.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. You're a mindset coach and a motivational speaker with a focus of helping individuals turn their adversity into strength. But today we're going to be exploring how you got there, and you spent some time in prison for a crime you didn't commit. Explore about the mindset, how you dealt with that, and how that relates to you as a mindset coach today. Before we get into that, Marc, I'd like to understand and find out, because I'm really curious and nosy, is what do you love about what you do now?
Oh, good question. That light bulb moment is probably the highlight. This is what keeps my passion alive when I'm working with a client. It's that sort of moment where someone, where the penny drops, basically, where they see the difference between their old thinking and their current way of thinking, and basically thinking to themselves, why haven't I done this sooner? And that's the sort of moment when everybody sort of breaks free of those chains, when they've been holding themselves back in some way, and then start to move forward. And it's that moment when everybody finds that light bulb moment. That's the moment which inspires me the most to carry on doing what I do in terms of my one-to-one work with clients and so on. It's fabulous. It's the best high I've ever had in my life. It's the best buzz you can imagine. Yeah. So, yeah, that's probably the best part of the job, I would say.
Fantastic. That's really good to hear. And I probably are similar. I have that sort of love of seeing those moments where people really get inspired and really unlock that sort of human potential and see something different and transformation in their lives. So, yeah, that's the great thing about being a coach, getting alongside people and working in that way. Now, you were falsely imprisoned, and I'd like us to go back to this because it really ties into what you do today, really, is and probably in a very short version, because I'm sure there's longer versions of you telling this story, but we only got so much time because I want to get into the mindset piece. But it'd be good for you just to share how you ended up being wrongfully imprisoned and what were the circumstances that surrounded that sort of incident, really.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you've said about the circumstances because that's important. Well, I was given a what's called an IPP sentence, which is essentially a life sentence in 2011 for a crime I hadn't done. However, I've never seen myself as some kind of victim of injustice. And the reason being is because there's, like you just rightly said, there's more to the story than meets the eye. And so I was at a work Christmas party in 2010. I was working in a car dealership at the time, and I was at number one salesman within that area, and I was doing really well. And I was on the surface of things thriving. I was working very long hours. I was working like 12-hour days. 12-hour days, 7 days a week sometimes. So the pressure of the job was very much on top of me, and I had other things I was juggling outside, and I was probably not living a very healthy lifestyle because of the work that I was doing and the pressure I was doing. So there was a lot of pressure involved at that time. Now, if you go backwards into my past, I came from a very good upbringing. My family were both hard workers, both gave me a wonderful upbringing. So lots of love, lots of support. But around the age of 15, I went off the rails a little bit because what happened was I was bullied quite badly at school. And after leaving school, I had this desire, this need to be included, to be a part of something, accepted. And I found myself within a gang at football. And I developed a bunch of antisocial sort of beliefs and attitudes around the time of the bullying, because I realized at that time that if you stand up to bullies using aggression or violence, then you don't get bullied. So what happened is I left school and I got involved in this gang, much to my parents' anguish. But I went off the rails, and for about 10 years of my life, I spent my life within this sort of world, doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, taking drugs, getting involved in things that are against the law and so on. And I found myself in a lot of trouble with the police. And around the age of 25, I started to move away from that. And I started getting myself back into a good job, and I was working. Before that, I was working in the family business. And on the surface of things seem to be going in the right direction. But however, what I hadn't counted on was that these beliefs, these attitudes that had created that sort of mindset to go and get involved in a gang at that early age hadn't been dealt with. So even though on the surface I'd moved away from that lifestyle, I'd actually not moved away from the belief system that I'd created. So it was still there. And so whenever I found myself under sort of some kind of pressure or stress, I would still revert back to that old way of thinking when triggered.
What was the old way of thinking? What were those beliefs that you had?
The actual belief was that if you're being bullied or intimidated, talked down to, and that sort of thing, to stand up using aggression and violence or violence. So that was the belief that I created at that early age. I know that because I did a lot of work to identify that belief later on, because I recognized later, and that comes back to the prison thing we're going to discuss, because when I found myself in prison, I recognized that it's easy to blame the world. It's easy to see yourself as a victim of justice. We all do, and we are victims a lot of the time. But when you look back at the bigger picture, there's a part that you've played in that, in creating that scenario. Now, had I not had those beliefs and attitudes at that early age, the likelihood of me getting involved in that altercation at that work Christmas party would have been pretty much zero, to be totally honest with you. But the truth of the matter is I was drunk. I was under a lot of pressure. And I found myself in a situation where it wasn't my argument, it was somebody else's, but my girlfriend got involved, and these 4 guys attacked my girlfriend. And I stepped in to sort of mitigate that, ended up getting attacked myself. I ended up in prison, in hospital, badly beaten up. I had broken ribs, broken arm. I had bad concussion for about 2 weeks. So it was I who got attacked. However, like I said, I wouldn't have found myself in that situation had I not had that beliefs, had I not been triggered that night. So the belief was I had to also defend my girlfriend. I had to protect her. And in my mind at that time, that meant standing up to these guys. I didn't reckon on the other side of it, which was like the best way to protect her would have probably been to get her away from that scenario and look after her and not end up going to hospital and leave her in a hotel on her own all night, which is what happened. So my belief system at that time was very antisocial, and it was not something that was supportive of where I wanted to go in my life. So
did you at the time when you had these beliefs, obviously, were you aware of at the time, as you are clearly now aware of those beliefs, or was it just something you reacted and was it triggered by the sort of aggression? And did you at that point also know where you wanted to get to as well? And did you feel that they were sort of stopping you getting there?
Well, no, I was ignorant to it. I mean, it's the honest truth. I had no real clue about the mindset back then, in terms of my own anyway. I was always in tune psychologically with things, like, I was always interested in that sort of stuff. But in terms of my own belief system, I had no real clue about it, how you manifested it, how you created it, and so on. So it was, I wasn't really, on the surface, I was doing all right. I thought I was doing okay. I was earning good money. I was working in a job I enjoyed and so on. So I wasn't seeing anything stopping me moving forward. I just had that belief that, I was doing all right. And like I said, on the surface, I told myself that I was moving on in my life, that I was because I'd moved away from that, because I'd cut one thing out of my life. To me, that was like, oh, well, that's gone now. I can move on. It doesn't work like that, because if you've been through a situation or you've been in an environment, or you've had a set of beliefs which have been unhealthy, the only way they're going to change is if you change them. So you can't just hope that they go away. They will still be there, embedded in your subconscious somewhere. So what happens is when you get triggered by something which triggers that belief, and it was a lot that circumstance that night was in alignment with the old kind of circumstances, like, for instance, being bullied. So that belief, I was being bullied, I have to react that way. So the belief is that, you've got to stand up for yourself. You've got to protect the people around you. You've got to do that. And that's what happened. So you can either go one of two ways. And this is what I know now, is that whenever someone does say or do something that triggers you, you can either react to it or you can choose to respond to it. And if you react to it, you're going to be reacting from the belief system that you've created maybe many, many years before. And if that's a reaction which is unhealthy or unhelpful to you, then perhaps that's an opportunity to look at that belief system and say to yourself, well, why am I reacting with anger or frustration or whatever it may be? And what do I need to change about my belief system so that I don't react that way? And that's essentially what happened to me. I mean, I found out I had to go through the hard way of doing it, unfortunately, but it led to me getting incarcerated. Much to everyone's shock, obviously, because I hadn't actually done the crime. But like I said, it was aligned with my past. So the reason why I actually got the sentence that I got was because I had the past. I was actually convicted on my past. It was like, and I don't blame anyone for this, because at the end of the day, if I was on a jury, I'd have done the same. When you look at the story is here nor there. It was my word, my girlfriend and I's word against these 4 guys. There was no forensics, no CCTV, no sort of independent witnesses or anything like that. So it was simply their word against ours. So really the crux of it came down to my past. And so when they looked at my past, they were like, well, look, he's been in trouble in the past. He must have done this sort of mentality. And that's the normal thing for anyone to make an assumption or a judgment on, to be totally honest. I mean, most of us would do that. If we saw something on the news and we saw a guy sent to prison for something that he'd supposedly done, and then they said, well, he's done similar in the past, we're all going to just say, well, it's his fault then, isn't it? Because that's the way
it's a shame, isn't it, that happened. So when you got given that sentence, describe the emotions that went through at that point, and when you literally in the dock and you were sentenced and you were going to be imprisoned, and obviously falsely imprisoned as well. How did you deal with that?
Well, at first, I was, like we just said, I reverted to that reaction, sort of stress reaction, and it was just full of victimized. I just felt like a victim. Initially, I was very numb to it, to be fair. At first, it was like it wasn't happening. It was like a surreal situation. Like I said, I'd expected to get off of it. So the thought that, it had gone this bad, and now I was looking at a life sentence.
So were you quite surprised when they actually got the sentence and you got?
Of course, yeah. I wasn't expecting that at first at all. Because I knew I hadn't done it. Even at that stage, I hadn't equated the fact that we just talked about, the fact that your past influences your future and so on. I hadn't thought of it in that respect. I just thought, well, this is what's happened, and now I'm in court for that, and I shouldn't be found guilty because I didn't do it. The evidence showed that was more in line with me actually not doing it. So I don't understand why. I didn't understand why I'd been found guilty. It was later, with when you've reflected upon it, you can see why. And so I understand why the jury now found me guilty. At that time, I couldn't, because I couldn't see why they couldn't see the flaws in the case, and the fact that there were so many contradictions and there was no actual evidence against me and so on. So and the story just that was presented didn't align with the facts, that the reality, basically. So anyway, so it was a situation. I was focused on my family, because I had lots of support. I had, like I said, I had a big loving family. I had lots of friends. The judge, when sentencing me, or sending me that, actually said it's the first time he's ever seen a full dock. I had 40 odd people there supporting me. For someone who's been convicted of a crime like this. He goes, usually someone comes to court for a crime like this, they have no support, because they wouldn't be a very nice person. So he couldn't comprehend why I had the support there. So, but that went on for weeks, months even, appealing and lobbying and all of that sort of stuff at first. It was only after I'd been sent to prison that we sort of accepted the reality and started to do what we could. But at first I was just completely numb. My mum was, I think, worse off than me, because she just was fuming. She was angry when told that I was never going to be released from prison, because this is the thing that people understand, is the IPP system. It's brought out in '96 by David Blunkett, and it was brought out initially for sex offenders. So if you'd done a crime like a rape or something many years before, and then you'd done something similar, they gave you the system the ability to give them a sentence where they had no release date, so that it's down to the parole board to determine when and if they are ever released. So what happened was this law got abused and rolled out to thousands of people. And it didn't have to be something as bad, as extreme as a rape or something like that. There's people in there using it for threatening phone calls and things like that. So it pitted down. So anyone who'd done a like threatening phone call once and they've done it again, we're now getting IPPs. So, and with an IPP, you're given a tariff, which is that's your basic amount of time that you've got to serve. However, pretty much no one ever gets out on their tariff. They usually do at least 3 times more than their tariff. There's one guy in there who's done 18 years, more now probably, on an 18-month tariff. So, you know, the chances of getting out on those things were zero at that time. So, and that's what people told me. So they said, like, you're not going to get out of prison, so just accept that. But I didn't accept that.
So you got given this. You accepted that you were in prison and you were sentenced, and you got the reality of that, which obviously it was a reality. How did you then deal with the fact that potentially you could not get out, and the fact that you had not done this crime? What was going on in your mind, and what were the sort of, I guess, the coping strategies that helped you navigate that difficulty while you were in prison?
Yeah, I mean, a good question. I mean, like, initially, I suppose I had just like a blind belief that I would get out. I just knew that I would. And I remember conversations with guys in there who were in similar situations to me. Well, I was just very confident about it. I was just like, well, we're going to get out. Something will happen. Something will change. And I had that optimism. I was never in that sort of like, oh, no, we're never going to get out sort of thing mindset. And maybe that's just my nature. I don't know. But everybody was saying to me, get it out of your head because you're not getting out. Whether that's inmates, whether that's staff. And so I didn't. So, but what it did make me do is reflect deeply within myself, because I recognized at that early stage, especially the fact that I'd been convicted of something I hadn't done. The fact is that they told me that you've got to accept it, because if you don't accept it, you will never get out. Definitely. You've got to take responsibility for it. So that triggered me into thinking, okay, I need to take some sort of, I can't just fight it and say, I didn't do it and I'm not doing, accepting that, because that won't help me. That won't help me move forward. So I need to do the work within myself to sort of find out why I'm in this situation and what I can do to change me so that I can progress. So I did. I started doing courses, and what are called offending behavior courses, which help you identify where your core beliefs come from. They help you deal with addictions, things like anger management, all of that sort of stuff. I did about 30 of those courses over a 6-year period. But those initial courses helped me start focusing on my mind, start working on myself. So I started digging up old beliefs. And that's where that initial belief came out, because it was one of the first things I did. It's like unraveling a ball of string. You're getting that bit of string, working backwards to find out where that belief initially started. And I recognized that it started at school. And that gave me the opportunity to change that belief to something that was more pro-social. So I dug it up.
How did you change that? How did you, once you realized that this belief system had created your history, how did you then sort of make steps to change that belief?
Simple, really. I mean, it was once I identified the belief and where it come from, it was a case of identifying whether it was serving me or not in the moment today. And, understanding that belief had been created under certain circumstances many years ago, which didn't reflect me as a person now and who I am moving forward. And it gave me that opportunity to sort of then create a new belief, change a new belief. So I created a new one, which was basically, if someone threatens you or bullies you or whatever, rather than reacting with aggression or violence, to be able to see it from another perspective, that it's actually them in pain. They're the one who's, whatever someone says or does is more about them than it is you, and not to take the thing personally. So I reflected on, so that's my now new belief, basically, because now if someone did do the same sort of thing that they did in the past and threaten me or bully me or anything like that, that would be my go-to belief. So I wouldn't find myself getting frustrated or triggered in the same way that I would have many years ago. It doesn't mean that you don't get triggered. We all get triggered to some extent, but it's that first and then second thought. So if your first thought is like, why is he having a go at me? Your second thought is he must be going through something that's causing him to react that way. So it's changing that belief system and controlling how you respond or react to those. So that's what I did at that early stage. It was the first 2 years. I was in jail for 6 years in total. And those first 2 years were spent doing a lot of work on myself and internal work on myself with the courses and so on. But
how did you I suppose wrestle with the fact of accepting reality, which was you're in prison, but also this belief that you're going to get out, but also not creating a victim mindset that you didn't do this crime. I mean, that to me, that's really quite complex to try and wrestle with that. How did you work that through? That really sounds tough to me.
What, not being feeling like a victim, you mean?
Well, not feeling like a victim, but trying to be positive, but also trying to accept the reality of where the situation was. And naysayers around you saying you're not going to get out. I mean, that's quite challenging, isn't it?
Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's plenty of times when I wasn't very happy in there. I wasn't always positive, but I mean, especially in those early days. But the reality is you can't change your reality in that situation. You've got to make the best of it. And I've always been that sort of person. I've not been the sort of person to wallow in self-pity. It's not my nature. So I will always be having a laugh with people. I'll always be doing things. So maybe that's a deflection. But what it helped me do is focus more on the moment in that situation rather than looking too far into the future. I didn't focus on the future so much. I was more focused on what I could do right now. And like I said, I had that belief. I had that core belief that, and again, the beliefs lead to everything, that one day I will get out. So I didn't think about when that would be or how that's going to happen. I just thought about now and sort of focused on what that was happening that day. And that meant just going to work in the morning, going to the gym, socializing with your mates. So not focusing too deeply into, oh no, why am I feeling it? Why am I in this situation? What could go wrong? And so I chose not to see myself like that. I've never enjoyed feeling victimized. It's not something I enjoy. I don't enjoy sympathy from people. So it's not if I do feel victim, because we all do at some point, it's natural, to feel that way. But I can get myself out of that way of thinking quite quickly because I just don't like the feeling of feeling that way. So I'm able to sort of like say, well, come on, just get up and get on with it, sort of thing. But that's how I used to be. But now if I have a thought or belief that creates a feeling of victimization, I'm able to actually identify it and really work through it and switch it to a perspective which is actually going to be serving of me now. But back then it was a bit different because I didn't have the skills or the talent or the things that I now have in terms of this area. But I suppose it was a natural thing as well, in terms of the way I deal with things, the coping.
And the way I talk us through the sort of daily, because obviously you talked about being in the moment there, which I think is really important about taking each day as it is, step by step, and that's being sort of present. When did you start to, I suppose, build that sort of way of thinking, and talk us through some of the stuff you would do on a daily basis that were, I would say, coping strategies that help you get through the challenges of naysayers saying you're not going to get out, the internal critics saying you're not going to get out, through to the victim thing, through to just being in prison around people who are probably not the greatest people to be around sometimes. Just how did you deal with that and keep a positive mindset, but also,
to be honest with you, that's a misconception, because there's some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life have been in prison.
Brilliant.
So it's a misconception that we have outside about prison, and the reality is most people outside have got absolutely no clue about prison. So that's the truth of the matter. We believe, and it all comes down to beliefs, because we believe what we think is happening about a situation, but that belief isn't necessarily true. It's only when we're able to look at things from other ways and perspectives that we see actually prisons actually can be a very positive place to be at times. You know, in terms of my social interactions, I had
Mm.
some very, very wonderful people around me who were very supportive through some of the darkest days I've ever experienced in my life. So you've got to look at it from another perspective, you know. But you know, prison, it works if you want it to work for you. And if you want to put yourself into certain situations, such as offended behavior courses, gym, reading, studying. I did an open university psychology degree in it. There's lots for you to do. It's just again down to your belief system, how you want to do. You can spend your life fighting everything, fighting yourself, fighting the system, fighting the world around you, or you can take responsibility for what you're doing and try and make the best of whatever's happening that day. Because again, it's only that day that counts. It's not what happens next week or the month later. It's that day. And if you're focused only on that moment, you can actually you can start moving forward. And I suppose I was in that situation where I was doing that. I was after 2 years in there. I was in a very good space mentally. I had people who I got on with me around me. I was very happy in myself. I was doing healthy things like working out and so on. But that's when everything changed, because that's when the first loss. My mum got ill, and it was that point. That was when everything sort of crumbled down, really, and that was when my life just fell apart, basically. And that was the real test. So it was initial. After I was like I said, I was given prisoner sentence in 2011. It was Christmas 2013 that my mum found out she had cancer. She was diagnosed early December, and she died on the 21st, very suddenly, very quickly. I was given the option of going to see her in prison, in hospital, but I was told I can either go and see her or I can go to the funeral. I can't do both. So I had to arrange the funeral because my father was in no fit state to do so. So it was a horrible situation, and it was the support of the people around me in that prison that kept me going through that. The different people on the wing, different groups of people from different cultures and so on, coming together to support you. Something that you probably wouldn't see as much out here. So people don't see that side of things in prison. You know, it was those people who really kept me focused, kept me going, because I had to be focused. I couldn't be an emotional wreck. I had to be focused because of my father. And it was like a string of things, one after the next. You can't predict it or imagine it, really. Firstly, my cat died. Now, I've always come from a family who loves animals, and we had 21 cats, believe it or not. And my cat, it was like my baby. She was fine, good health. My mum was obviously looking after her. And then my mum had been taken ill. She'd gone into hospital. And the day before, she passed, which is the 21st of December, I'd phoned my father to find out about my mum, obviously. And it was 10 a.m. in the morning. We were on 23-hour bang up. So we were behind the cell, a door, for 23 hours a day, unable to be out to have a shower, to use a phone or anything like that. So I was in that cell, and at 10 a.m. every morning, the door would open. I'd rush out to go and get to the phone before anyone else could get there. So I got to the phone, and I phoned my dad this is on the 20th of December, and he's in tears, and he said, I'm expecting to hear news about my mum. And he goes, no, Tipsy's died, my cat. And it threw me. I just couldn't understand what he was saying, because I wasn't expecting that. And in amongst all the noise and the banging and everything else going on in there, I had to take myself back off I just hung up the phone and went back to the cell and just sat there in my thoughts. I couldn't comprehend it. The very next day, I woke up at the same time, done the same thing, and this time it was my mum had passed. So I'd lost the two main females in my life within 2 days. So anyway, I had to arrange the funeral from that cell, do it all myself. And I moved to another prison. I was in Kent. I moved to one near where I lived to be closer to my father. And it was exactly 3 months after that, to the day after my mother passed, that I was on the phone to my dad in the morning, and he died from from cardiac arrest. So that was also a big shock. Again, back behind the door, I had to deal with that. I had to arrange his funeral as well. My grandfather died 4 months later. And all, in 10 months, I lost 33 people, animals, or things, such as the family home. I had to sell the family home from prison as well. So that puts into context the initial part of the sentence where you're wrestling with whether you should be in there or not, or whatever.
So how did you, I mean, apart from being in prison and dealing with that and falsely imprisoned and dealing with all those, 33 losses in various guises, how did you maintain that sort of, what was the mindset going on in that in terms of how did you deal with that really?
At that moment in time, I shut my emotions off and just kept going.
Mm.
And that's the truth of the matter, because again, I wasn't a trained coach like I am now. I mean, if I'd have gone back and done anything differently, what I would have probably done then is consciously shut my emotions off to get through the day-to-day stuff. Because like I said, I couldn't break down. I had to arrange the funerals. I had to be there. I had to take responsibility for this. And that meant there was no one supporting me. I had no family left. All my family had died. I had no money. I had to get through that. I had to arrange the funerals. I had to sell the family home, which was no easy task because I had to get it cleared out, fat people in there to clear the house out and put it on the market and so on. And I had to do all this from prison. And luckily, I had some very close friends supporting me who helped me through that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do it at all. So it was sort of like survival mode. You go into survival mode just to get through that period. You deal with the emotions later. And this is what happened with me. I focused on the day-to-day stuff. I was working literally. I was working in a DHL warehouse at the time, focusing on that just to get through the day-to-day stuff. I had to write my dad's eulogy on the worst wing in the prison, to a sound of loud rap music, banging doors, shouting, and God knows what else. Focusing on that. So it was an incredibly difficult period, unbelievably difficult period. At the same time, trying to sort of comprehend what happened.
What did you learn about yourself when you look back and reflect on all that time? What did you learn?
I can deal with anything. That there's nothing in this life can throw at me that I can't deal with. Nothing. Because I will just get up and keep going. And that's what I learned about myself. It's not easy. There's many times I thought about killing myself or I just didn't want to go on. I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning to go to work, but I did. And that's the difference. I just kept going because it was hard. And it was a year after my parents had gone. That's you can't keep going. This is what I've learned. You can't bury your emotions and just keep going. You've got to deal with them. And it's the same as if you look in the wars and things. I'm a history buff. I like all my history stuff. If you look at a lot of these veterans in the old days, and there's a misconception with a lot of guys these days, specifically. I work with men who say, "Oh well, just get on with it." I'm sorry, but if they say, well, back in the day in the wars, they used to just get on with it. Well, they didn't, because they all had their demons. They all had their problems for many, many, many years later. So if you don't unpack that stuff, it will just come back and hurt you. So at that stage, though, I had to sort of just put it to one side just to get through the day-to-day stuff. And it was a year after that, the initial losses, that I had been moved to a new wing. I was on an open wing, which was more freedom. You had a key for your door. You could cook your own food and so on. So I had a lot more freedom. So in order to sort of celebrate that, I suppose, I found a friend. And she used to be my first girlfriend. And she told me some news. And it was that news that really sent me into a spiral, which broke me, basically. And it was like a stack of cards crumbling down. She told me my ex-girlfriend and my best friend were now secretly seeing each other. And basically they didn't know each other. So it completely shocked me. And turned out my so-called friend had been manipulating me to get information from her about her and so on. Long story short, that broke me. I took an overdose, tried to kill myself, and I had a heart attack, and luckily got revived with CPR by one of the guys on the wing. and that brought me around. And that was the moment. That was that turning point moment when I sort of come round and the next day and thought to myself, nah, this isn't me. I want to be, I'm not a victim. And I decided, all right, I'm going to start taking control of myself. I'm not going to worry about getting out of prison. You can take what you want from me, life, but I'm still going to keep going. And I did. And it was hard. It was very hard. That first year was probably the hardest year of my life in terms of physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being. It was in a difficult place, but I just kept going. And the way I did that was to focus less on my external, whatever it was, circumstances, less on whatever it was that was holding me back mentally or emotionally or whatever, and literally just on the day-to-day stuff, focusing on how I can be at my most productive today. What does that involve? That means studying, that means exercising, that means helping others, training, whatever it may be, reading books. So I enrolled in the Open University to do a psychology degree. I got a job working in the education department, teaching critical reasoning skills. I started mentoring young kids on wings from gangs because I'd been in that lifestyle. So gradually I started feeling better about myself, bit by bit, slowly over a period of time. And it was then that the seed was sown about coaching. Because I did a business course, and in the same class, the same teacher that I was working for in critical reasoning skills, and they asked me, hypothetically, what career would you choose? And the first thing that came into my mind, and God knows why, is life coach. And they did the research. I had no clue about coaching. I didn't know what it meant. And the guy went off and done the research and came back, and all the attributes and skills I had. So it sowed the seed. Anyway, I forgot all about it. And I carried on with what I was doing. And it was 3 years later. And I've now been told I'm getting released. And that completely stunned me because I never expected that at all. But what happened was Michael Gove had changed the laws a year earlier to make it easier for people to move through the system so that they weren't clogging up the system, which is what had been happening. And they were started letting people out, giving people opportunities. And the truth be told is when I went to the parole board, they couldn't get me out quick enough because they basically said to me, we've seen what you've been through in here, and there's not a thing in the world that you can't deal with out there. So they let me out. And ever since then, that's what I've been doing, working. Well, not ever since then, but yeah, now it's gone full circle. Now I'm working with them.
That's fantastic. And to people who are listening right now, I mean, your story is incredible, Mark. It's really inspiring. It's in terms of all what you've been through, and you continue to go, and you've worked on yourself, and you got to the lowest point where you tried to take your own life, and that was your trigger point. Some people might be listening right now who are facing an adversity, facing a struggle. They may be facing an injustice, and try and maintain that positive mindset. How can they begin that journey towards that resilience and growth that you're sharing, you're experiencing yourself now?
I think the key is awareness. It's aware, because if we're not aware of what we're telling ourselves about certain circumstances in our minds, how on earth are we supposed to change that? And majority of us aren't conscious of what we're telling ourselves 90% of 98% of the time it is apparently about anything in life. It doesn't matter if it's adversity, whatever, but we believe our first thoughts. We have assumptions, we have interpretations, like the assumption about prison, for instance. It's a natural thing that we all do. Oh, it must be full of lunatics in there. Yeah, you get lunatics in there, but a lot of them are really clever guys and interesting people. So it's an assumption. We make assumptions and judgments about everything and everyone. It's human nature. We can't change that, but we can become more aware of it. And the interpretations we make about this, the fears that we have about whatever it may be, they're all inbuilt. We create them. So in order to sort of change your perspective of your situation, regardless of what that is in terms of adversity, your difficulties, your challenges, we need to be able to see it in a different light, firstly. And you're only going to do that if you're aware of what you're telling yourself about that situation to begin with. And if we're not aligned with that, if we're not aligned with our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions, then they will take control. Our unconscious mind will drive them for us.
Mm.
So we're never in control of that. We're just on autopilot, essentially.
Mm.
So it's very important to be able to sort of take to learn how to sort of switch that unconscious mind off and choose how you want to be thinking, feeling, and acting in life. And if you can do that, you're taking back control out of from instead of focusing on external restrictions or difficulties or adversity in life, which is we can't avoid. You know, the way I see adversity and challenges now is I actually see them as positive things. I don't see them as negatives. Don't get me wrong. No one enjoys going through adversity. No one enjoys hardship. We don't enjoy having no money. We don't enjoy being in prison. We don't enjoy COVID. We don't enjoy all of these things. But if we're only focusing on the thing that they're restricting us from doing, we're not focusing on the lesson behind it and what it's teaching us about ourselves and the situation, the opportunity of growth. And if you can focus more on the growth, the opportunity, the ability to sort of learn something new here, then you're winning. And it's no longer a negative situation. It's actually a positive one. And so you're changing the whole dynamics of that whole situation simply by switching your perspective of it. And I find that's what helps me today. Because I'll be honest, my life is no walk in the park now. It's different to how it used to be, but I've still got the same challenges and adversities that everybody else has, financial problems and so on. Going through a cost of living crisis, running a small business isn't easy, as a lot of people will know. So there's lots of different challenges that we've all got in our lives. But what my pastors taught me is that it doesn't matter what your external circumstances are, you can still be successful, you can still be happy, you can still be positive, you still be confident, and all of these things if you are able to change your perspective of your circumstances.
No, that's a really sort of powerful lesson, I think. And I think also I really picked up that you use the resources that are around you, and whether that's the people in the prison, the courses, the gym, all the various things you could have in the 23 hours a day you locked up, but you use the resources. And I think that's really powerful as well. If people want to get in touch with you, Marc, and get more engaged about your story and how you might be able to help them in their sort of adversity and do a transformation like you've done yourself, what's the best way of doing that?
Probably either through LinkedIn or Facebook currently. I do have a website, but it's currently down at the moment because I'm getting a new WordPress one. So I'm moving up in the world with that. But currently, the best way is probably LinkedIn or Facebook. Depends where you see this. I've also got a YouTube channel, and I do a podcast called To Hell and Back Podcast, and I'm writing a book as well, which is called To Hell and Back and Then Some, which is again, it's my story, but it's also about everybody's story, if that makes sense. So that's going to be out hopefully within the next year. And so yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, find me on LinkedIn, find me on Facebook, or drop me a line directly, either.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on. Thank you for your story. Thank you for the inspiration and the transformation, and also the lessons you've learned and how you've adapted changed your mindset. And I think there's a lot of takeaways from this episode today. Really, thank you for your time, Marc.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.